The laughter started before Maeve Adair had taken 3 steps into the entrance hall. It wasn't the sharp, sudden kind, not a joke catching someone off guard. It was the slow, rolling variety. The kind that built from whispers and spread like oil on marble. Slick and deliberate. Designed to be heard by exactly the right person. Her. She stood in the arched doorway of the grand hall of Thornfeld Palace, and she knew, with the same bone-deep certainty that told her when a translation was wrong before she could identify the error, that every pair of eyes in the entrance corridor had landed on her and found her lacking. The hall stretched before her like the throat of some gilded beast. Vaulted ceilings dripped with iron chandeliers, each one blazing with hundreds of candles that turned the air amber and warm. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting the great wolf lineages, and the marble floor reflected everything back, doubling the light, doubling the crowd, doubling the feeling that she was the only person here who didn't belong. She had been told to come. The king's diplomatic office had sent the summons 3 weeks ago. Maeve Adair, court translator, was required at the autumn gala to provide real-time interpretation for the visiting Eastmarch delegation. Required, not invited. The distinction mattered, and she had come alone. That was the part they were laughing about. Every other woman in the hall was escorted, arm in arm with husbands or fathers or brothers, their gowns bright as stained glass, their hair pinned with jewels. They moved in pairs and clusters, orbiting each other in some elaborate social solar system where the gravity was wealth, and Maeve was nothing. A stray object in the wrong orbit. Her dress was wrong too. She could feel it in the way eyes lingered and then slid away. The deep plum bodice was well made. She had spent 2 months' savings on the wool, but everyone else wore silk, satin, organza that floated when they moved. Maeve's charcoal taffeta skirt rustled when she walked, and the sound seemed to announce with every step, she made this work. She tried. She gripped the copper chain at her throat. Her mother's, the only piece she owned, and lifted her chin. 3 steps in. That was where she stopped, because a woman in a sweeping gold brocade gown with bell sleeves that brushed the floor stepped directly into her path and looked her up and down with the kind of measured assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. "My dear." The woman's voice carried effortlessly, pitched to reach the surrounding crowd. Her hair was dark and elaborately coiled, held in place with gold combs that matched the onyx beadwork cinching her waist. Her eyes were sharp amber, bright and predatory. "Surely you've made a wrong turn. The service entrance is at the rear of the east wing." Maeve's stomach dropped, but her voice held. "I'm Maeve Adair, court translator. I was summoned for the Eastmarch delegation." Summoned. The woman, Lady Dorothea Hargrave, Maeve realized with a sinking feeling, recognizing her from council sessions. Let the word hang in the air like she was tasting it. How quaint. "And you came, what, alone? No escort? No house affiliation?" She turned to the cluster of nobles behind her with an expression of theatrical bewilderment. She came alone. The laughter swelled. It hit Maeve in the chest like a closed fist. Her cheeks burned. She had been laughed at before. You didn't grow up a packless orphan with a talent for languages without learning what it felt like to be dismissed. But this was different. This was calculated. A woman who had positioned herself at the entrance like a gatekeeper, systematically dismantling Maeve's right to be in the room. She opened her mouth. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. Something sharp? Something she'd regret? Something that would give Dorothea exactly the ammunition she needed to have her removed. She never got the chance. A voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. Low, controlled, and absolutely, devastatingly calm. "She's with me." The hall went silent. Not the gradual hush of a crowd losing interest. The immediate total silence of a room that has just realized power has shifted, and no one is sure which direction it went. Maeve turned toward the voice and found him already beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed the crowd parting, though it must have, because the man standing at her left shoulder was not the kind of person you failed to notice. He was tall, taller than anyone else in the corridor, with the kind of frame that suggested controlled strength rather than brute force. His shoulders were broad beneath a midnight black velvet coat with a standing collar, buttoned to the throat over a crisp ivory linen shirt. His trousers were dark, his boots polished, and he wore no crown. But he didn't need one. His hair was jet black, cropped close at the temples, and swept back on top in a way that should have looked severe, but instead looked like he simply couldn't be bothered with anything that required more effort. His jaw was sharp, his mouth a firm line, and his eyes. Maeve's breath caught. Deep, midnight blue. The color of the sky in the last moment before full dark, when the first stars are just beginning to burn through. And they were fixed on Lady Dorothea with an expression that made the temperature in the hall drop by several degrees. "Your Majesty." Dorothea's voice had changed completely, stripped of its theatrics, suddenly small. She dipped into a deep curtsy. "I was merely welcoming. You were laughing at a woman who was summoned to serve this court." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "In my hall, at my gala, while performing a function I personally authorized." Maeve stared at him, the Alpha King. Caius Varnell? She had translated documents bearing his seal for 2 years and never once seen him in person. The diplomatic office operated 3 floors below the throne room, and translators, particularly junior ones without pack affiliations, did not receive invitations to the upper courts. He was looking at Dorothea, but he extended his left arm toward Maeve without turning his head. The gesture was unhurried, almost casual, as though offering his arm to a woman in a plum-wool bodice and scuffed boots was something he did every evening. "Miss Adair." Now he looked at her, and something shifted in those midnight eyes. Something that softened the controlled fury into something warmer, something almost careful. "May I?" Her wolf stirred. It was the strangest sensation, not the warning bristle she was used to, or the restless pacing that came before a shift. This was a settling. A deep, resonant stillness, like a tuning fork finding its match. And beneath it, something she couldn't explain. A sound. Not quite a sound. More like the memory of one. A whisper that hadn't been spoken yet, pressing against the inside of her ribs. She took his arm. His forearm was warm beneath the velvet. Solid. She could feel the controlled tension in the muscle, the deliberate steadiness of a man who was furious and choosing to channel every ounce of it into composure. Her fingers rested on his sleeve, and the whisper in her chest sharpened, became a low hum, a vibration that seemed to travel up through her hand and settle somewhere behind her sternum. He felt it too. She knew, because his jaw tightened, just once, a fraction of a movement that anyone else would have missed. But Maeve had spent her career watching mouths and muscles for the micro-expressions that betrayed what words concealed. She saw it, and she saw the way his gaze dropped to where her hand rested on his arm before returning to her face. "Shall we?" he said. His voice was lower now, rougher at the edges. They walked into the grand hall together, and the crowd parted. Maeve kept her chin up and her eyes forward, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that the most powerful wolf in 4 kingdoms had just publicly claimed her company in front of every noble family in the realm. She tried not to think about the hum in her chest that was growing louder with every step. The ballroom was even more overwhelming. A vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling painted in deep blue and gold, depicting the phases of the moon. The orchestra was already playing, something lush and sweeping, and the room was a swirl of color and movement as couples turned through the first dance. Caius guided her to the far side of the room, away from the main cluster of nobles, to a position near the tall glass doors that opened onto a garden terrace. The night air seeped through the gaps, cool, carrying the scent of late autumn roses and wood smoke. You can let go, Maeve said quietly. We're past the audience. He looked down at her. I'm aware. He didn't let go. Something fluttered in her stomach. She pulled her hand back herself, and the loss of contact sent a jolt through the hum in her chest. A sharp, discordant note, like a string snapping. She pressed her palm flat against her skirt. You didn't have to do that, she said. Do what? The entrance. The arm. The... She gestured vaguely. She's with me. All of it. He studied her for a long moment. In the softer light near the terrace doors, away from the blaze of the chandeliers, his eyes were darker, nearly black. Dorothea Hargrave has been using her position to gatekeep my court for 6 years. She decides who enters, who is seen, who is worthy of being here. He paused. I've been looking for a reason to make it clear that she does not speak for me. Maeve blinked. So I was. Convenient. Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite a flinch. You were the first person she targeted that I happened to be standing close enough to hear. He tilted his head slightly. Although happened may not be entirely accurate. The hum in her chest pulsed. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, You translate for the East March delegation. Yes. You speak Old East March dialect. Not the formal trade variant, the mountain dialect. The one with 17 verb tenses. Maeve's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Because I read every translation that crosses my desk, Miss Adair, and yours are the only ones that capture the conditional reverent tense correctly. It changes the meaning of half the trade agreements we've negotiated in the last 2 years. He held her gaze. You've been doing essential work from a basement office without recognition, without pack protection, and without a single person in this palace acknowledging that you exist. Tonight was supposed to change that. The words landed like stones in still water. Maeve felt the ripples move through her. Surprise, then confusion, then something harder to name. Something that felt dangerously close to being seen. Supposed to, she repeated. I arranged your summons personally. I wanted you in this room, at this event, so the court could see the person behind the translations they depend on. His jaw tightened again. I did not arrange for Dorothea to ambush you at the door. Maeve was quiet for a moment. The orchestra swelled into a new piece, something slower, more intimate. Through the glass doors, she could see the garden terrace lit with paper lanterns, their warm glow swaying in the autumn breeze. You could have sent a note, she said finally, explaining why I was being summoned, or assigned me an escort so I wouldn't walk in alone and give her an opening. The slight crease between his brows deepened. You're right. I should have. It was such a simple admission, no deflection, no justification, that it knocked the defensiveness right out of her. Maeve had spent her life dealing with powerful people who never admitted fault for anything. The straightforwardness of it left her momentarily off balance. I also should not have let the situation in the entrance go on as long as it did, he continued, his voice quieter now. I was across the hall when you arrived. I should have been closer. You were plenty close enough, Maeve said, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because something warmed in his expression. Something that made the hum in her chest sing a note she didn't recognize. A server passed with a tray of crystal glasses. Caius took 2 without looking, handing one to Maeve with the ease of someone who had spent his life in rooms like this. She took it, and their fingers brushed. The world shifted. Not dramatically. Not a crash or a crack or a flash of light. More like a lens adjusting. Suddenly, every sound in the ballroom was crisp and distinct. The scrape of a bow across strings, the click of heels on marble, the low murmur of a conversation happening 40 feet away that she somehow heard as clearly as if the speakers were standing beside her. And beneath it all, a heartbeat that was not her own. Slow, steady, resonant. His heartbeat. She was hearing his heartbeat. She looked up. His face had changed. The careful control was still there, but beneath it something had cracked open. His eyes were wide, just slightly, and fixed on her with an expression she could only describe as stunned recognition. "You heard that," he said. Not a question. She swallowed. "Your heart." "Yours," he said. "I heard yours, from across the room. The moment you walked in." Pauses. "That's why I was already moving toward you, Maeve, not because of Dorothea. Because I heard your heartbeat through a crowd of 300 people, and my body started walking before my mind caught up." The echo bond. She had read about it in the old texts she translated. The rarest of the mate bonds, where sound became the bridge between two wolves. Whispers that carried across impossible distances. Heartbeats that synchronized. She set down the glass carefully. Her hand was shaking. "I need air," she said. She didn't wait for permission. She pushed through the glass doors onto the garden terrace, and the cool night air hit her like a blessing. She gripped the stone balustrade and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she'd learned as a child when the world became too loud. He followed her. Of course he did. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps, but his breathing. "I'm not going to apologize for the bond," he said from behind her. "But I'm also not going to pretend I don't hear your pulse racing." She turned. He was standing just inside the terrace doors, the warm light of the ballroom behind him. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't touching her, giving her 6 feet of cool night air and stone, and somehow that restraint was more devastating than any touch could have been. "I don't know how to do this," Maeve said. Just walked me into a room full of people who think I'm nothing and said she's with me, like it was the simplest thing in the world. It was? It wasn't. She pressed her palms harder against the stone. "You're the Alpha King. I'm a translator who lives in a rented room above a bookbinder's shop. I own one dress and the boots I'm wearing have a hole in the left sole, and I had to stuff parchment in it to get here tonight. You can't just claim someone like me." He moved then, not toward her, to the balustrade beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, but not close enough to touch. He rested his forearms on the stone and looked out at the garden. "My mother was a weaver," he said. Maeve blinked. "She worked in the textile district. My father was the alpha heir, and she was a woman who could turn raw wool into something that looked like captured sunlight." He was quiet for a moment. The court laughed at her, too. She came to her first gala in a dress she'd made herself, and the women of the court told her she'd gotten lost on her way to the service entrance. The parallel hit Maeve like a physical blow. She wore that dress to every formal event for 3 years, not because she couldn't afford another one, because she wanted them to see her, to understand that she would not shrink herself to fit inside their definition of worthy. He turned his head and looked at her, and in the lantern light his midnight blue eyes held a depth of feeling that made her chest ache. "You came to this gala alone, Maeve. You walked into a room that was built to make you feel small, wearing a dress you worked for, on boots with parchment in the soles. And you didn't turn around." His voice dropped lower. "Do you understand what that looks like to me?" She couldn't speak. "It looks like the bravest thing I've seen in this palace in years." The hum in her chest had become a song, low and resonant, and so full that she thought it might crack her ribs from the inside. She could hear his heartbeat again, closer now, and she realized with a start that her own heart had slowed to match it, beat for beat, perfectly synchronized. "This is terrifying," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." They stood like that for a long time, side by side at the balustrade, not touching, listening to each other's heartbeats in the autumn dark. The music from the ballroom drifted through the glass doors, muffled and sweet, and the paper lanterns swayed above the garden paths below. Entrance. She wanted to humiliate me, Entrance. She wanted to humiliate me before I could set foot in the ballroom. Maeve's jaw tightened. Why? Because I've been reading your translations to the full council for the past 6 months and citing your work by name. Dorothea has spent a decade ensuring that no one without noble blood gains influence in this court. He straightened. You represent something she can't control. Competence that doesn't require her approval. So she tried to break me at the door. She underestimated you. Maeve turned fully toward him. The anger was building now. Not the hot, reactive kind that burned and faded, but something colder, cleaner. The kind that clarified rather than clouded. I want to go back inside, she said. He searched her face. Whatever he found there made something fierce spark in his eyes. Are you sure? I didn't stuff parchment in my boots and walk halfway across the city to stand on a terrace. She lifted her chin. I was summoned to translate for the East March delegation. I intend to do my job. The corner of his mouth curved. It was the first real expression of warmth she'd seen from him. Not a full smile, but the promise of one, and it transformed his face from carved marble into something living and warm and dangerously beautiful. Then allow me. He offered his arm again. This time, when she took it, the echo bond sang between them, a clear, ringing note that settled into a steady, golden hum. She heard his breath catch. They walked back into the ballroom together. The effect was immediate. Every head turned. Maeve Adair, packless, common-born, wearing wool to a silk affair, walked through the grand hall on the arm of the Alpha King, and the echo of their synchronized heartbeats was so loud in her own ears that she was convinced the entire room could hear it. The East March delegation was gathered near the eastern alcove, their ambassador looking uncomfortable in the formal surroundings. Maeve felt the shift the moment she stepped into their circle. The ambassador's face relaxed when he heard her speak his language, not the stilted formal trade dialect, but the rolling mountain variant with its subtle inflections and reverent tenses. She translated for an hour. Kaya stood nearby, close enough for her to feel his presence like a warm current at her back, far enough to let her work without interference. She caught him watching her once, twice, a dozen times. Each time, the echo bond carried something new. Not words, but impressions. Approval. Admiration. A deep, patient attention that felt like the opposite of everything she'd ever experienced from the people who were supposed to notice her. It was during the second round of negotiations, a delicate exchange about fishing rights that hinged on a verb tense most translators rendered incorrectly, that Lady Dorothea struck again. Forgive me, Dorothea said, appearing at the edge of the circle with a smile that didn't reach her amber eyes. But surely the delegation would prefer a certified court interpreter. Miss Adair is a junior translator from the basement offices, perhaps someone with more appropriate credentials? Lady Hargrave. Maeve's voice was steady, clear. Heard Ambassador Curthin Hughes was in the heard. Ambassador Curthin Hughes was in the conditional reverent tense, which conveys simultaneous respect and contingency. In formal trade dialect, which is what a certified court interpreter would use, that tense doesn't exist. It would be rendered as a simple conditional, which would change the sentence from, "We would be honored to discuss terms, should it please your king," to, "We will discuss terms." One is a diplomatic courtesy. The other is a demand. She held Dorothea's gaze. I have been ensuring that distinction is preserved in every document that crosses the king's desk for 2 years. If you would like to explain to Ambassador Curthin that his careful diplomacy has been wasted because you'd prefer someone with a noble surname, please be my guest. Pauses. The silence that followed was different from the one in the entrance hall. That silence had been shock. This one was something else. This one had weight. This one was the sound of a room recalculating. Ambassador Curthin spoke, in the mountain dialect, directly to Maeve. She translated without breaking eye contact with Dorothea. The ambassador says he will negotiate with this translator or none at all. He says she speaks his language like she was born in his mountains, and he trusts her voice. Dorothea's smile didn't falter, but her eyes did, a flicker of something cold and sharp before she dipped her head and retreated with a murmured excuse about refreshments. Maeve's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back. A hand touched the small of her back. Barely a brush, light as a whisper. Chaos. She hadn't heard him move closer, but the echo bond had. She'd felt his heartbeat accelerate the moment Dorothea approached. Felt the controlled fury in the rhythm of it. Felt the moment he chose to stay back and let Maeve handle it herself. That, he said, low enough that only she could hear, was magnificent. She exhaled. The shaking didn't stop, but something warm settled beneath it. The gala continued. Maeve translated 3 more sessions, navigated 2 territorial disputes, and caught a critical error in a trade agreement that would have cost the Western provinces a year of mineral revenue. Each time, Caius was near, not hovering, not directing, simply present. A steady, warm anchor at the edge of her awareness, his heartbeat a constant rhythm beneath the music. It was near midnight when the crowd thinned enough for them to find each other again on the terrace. The paper lanterns had burned low, their glow amber and flickering. Maeve leaned against the balustrade and let the cool air settle against her flushed skin. "You could have stepped in," she said. "With Dorothea. The second time." He stood beside her again. That same careful distance, close enough to feel, far enough to choose. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" "Because you didn't need me to." He turned to face her, and in the low light his expression was open in a way she hadn't seen before, stripped of the formal control, the careful composure. What was left was something raw and earnest and profoundly vulnerable. And because the court needed to see that. Not me defending you, you defending yourself, proving that you belong in that room on your own merit. Not because I put you there. Maeve felt tears prick the backs of her eyes and blinked them away furiously. She would not cry on this terrace. She had stuffed parchment in her boots and walked into a palace and stared down a woman who wanted to erase her. And she would not cry because a king had just told her she was enough without him. "You're making it very difficult to keep my guard up," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Good." He stepped closer. 1 step. The echo bond roared between them. Not a hum now, not a whisper, but a sound like a choir holding a single, perfect note. She could hear every beat of his heart as though it were inside her own chest. Maeve, the way he said her name, like it was a word in a language only he spoke. Like it had 17 verb tenses and every one of them meant mine. "I need you to know something," he said. His voice was rough, unsteady. The Alpha King, who commanded armies and negotiated treaties and had not flinched once all evening, was unsteady. "I didn't bring you to this gala because of the bond. I didn't know about the bond until tonight. I brought you here because your work deserved to be seen, and because every time I read one of your translations, I could feel the person behind it. The precision, the care, the fierce refusal to let a single nuance be lost. And I wanted to meet her." He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a loose tendril of dark chestnut hair away from her temple. His fingertips barely grazed her skin, but the echo between them exploded. A cascade of sound and sensation that made the lanterns flicker and the night air hum with something that felt ancient and irreversible. "And then I heard your heartbeat," he said, voice breaks, "from across a room of 300 people, and I understood that I was never going to hear anything else as clearly for the rest of my life." Maeve's hand came up before she could stop it, pressed flat against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating beneath the velvet, could hear it in her ears, in her bones, in the echo that connected them like a wire drawn taut between 2 points. "I'm still terrified," she whispered. He covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, his fingers careful. "So am I." Pauses. "But I would rather be terrified with you than steady without you." He leaned down, slowly, watching her face the entire time, giving her every chance to step back, to say no, to choose differently. His hand came up to cup her jaw, warm fingers, trembling slightly, infinitely gentle. She didn't step back. His mouth met hers, and the echo bond became a symphony. It was soft. That was what she hadn't expected. For all his power, for all the controlled intensity that radiated from him, the kiss was devastatingly soft. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her knees buckle, and his arm came around her waist, pulling her close, holding her up, his heartbeat thundering against her palm. The world went quiet. Not silent. Full. Full of his breathing and her breathing and the perfect synchronized rhythm of their two hearts beating as one. The echo bond settled between them like a living thing, warm and golden and utterly certain. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. His eyes were closed. His thumb traced slow circles against her jaw. "Come back inside with me," he murmured. "To translate?" His laugh was low and broken and beautiful. "To dance, to be seen. To let every person in that room understand that Maeve Adair belongs in this palace. Not because I say so, but because the work she does holds this kingdom together." She pulled back enough to look at him. His midnight blue eyes were bright, and in them she saw something she had never seen directed at her before. Pride. Not the possessive kind. The kind that came from watching someone you admired refuse to be diminished. "One dance," she said. "One." They went back inside. They danced. It was more than one. 3 months later, Maeve stood in the entrance hall of Thornfell Palace and looked up at the arched doorway where she had once stopped, 3 steps in, and felt the world close its teeth around her. The hall looked different now. Not because anything had physically changed. The chandeliers still blazed. The tapestries still hung in their ancient positions. The marble still reflected everything back doubled. It looked different because she walked through it every day. Because her office had been moved from the basement to the 3rd floor, with windows that overlooked the eastern gardens and a desk large enough to spread 3 translations across simultaneously. Because when she passed through this hall now, people nodded. Not in deference, in recognition. The translator who had restructured the East March fishing accords. The woman who had caught the mineral rights error. The interpreter Ambassador Curthin personally requested for every session. Maeve adjusted the collar of her plum wool bodice, the same one, carefully maintained, worn deliberately, and smiled. "You're doing it again." Caius appeared beside her, and even after 3 months, the echo bond still made her chest sing every time he was near. His heartbeat was a constant companion now, a steady rhythm beneath the noise of her days that reminded her she was not, and never would be again, alone. Doing what? Standing in doorways and looking philosophical. He offered his arm, and his midnight blue eyes were warm. "The East March delegation is waiting. Something about a water rights amendment that requires, and I quote, 'the translator who actually understands what we mean.'" She took his arm. The echo bond hummed, clear and golden and sure. "Lady Hargrave won't be joining us?" Maeve asked. Caius's expression was carefully neutral. "Lady Hargrave has been reassigned to oversee agricultural development in the outer provinces. I'm told the sheep are excellent company." Maeve pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. She failed. He glanced down at her, and the warmth in his expression was the same as it had been on the terrace that night. Open, earnest, profoundly certain. He lifted her hand from his arm, pressed his lips to her knuckles, and murmured against her skin, "Ready?" She thought about parchment in boots, about copper chains and plum wool, and a room full of laughter that had tried to convince her she was nothing. She thought about a man who had heard her heartbeat through 300 people and started walking toward her before he knew why. "Ready," she said. They walked through the doors together. And this time, no one laughed.